Bismillah ar-Rahman.
Yes.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallim. Alhamdulillah, we'll continue from where we left off. So we said there are different perspectives of looking at the attributes and the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of Allah's attributes and some of His names are those that they convey the meaning of that which we negate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure from. Okay? So of course there are many more. We covered some of them. We're now going to go over to the attributes of affirmation. Okay? Meaning these are now, we're going to look at it from the perspective of what attributes and what meanings do we establish for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So the first section was Allah is not this. Right? Allah is not that. Now we're going, Allah has this attribute. Okay? Now, so that's what we mean by attributes of affirmation. Okay? So now a question over here is, how many of these attributes does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have? Okay? So the Quran tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the most beautiful names. Okay? So you have قُلِ ادْعُوا Allah, say call upon Allah, or Ar-Rahman. أَيَّمَّا تَدْعُوا. Whether when you're making dua you say Allah or you say Ar-Rahman, فَلَهُ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. Then the most beautiful names, all of them belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, we look to, so this is a naqli, right? So naqli we said it's not something based on rationale. Based on our intellect, can we know how many names Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has? No. I mean, not based on our intellect, right? It's based on what the Prophet ﷺ tells us. Okay? So one of the brothers said, Allah has 99 names. Okay? That's based on the famous hadith, لِلَّهِ تِسْعٌ وَتِسْعِينَ إِسْمًا. Allah has 99 names. Most scholars, and in fact all scholars, they say that is not an exhaustive statement. Okay? It doesn't mean that Allah only has 99. He has 99 names. That's not to say that He doesn't have more. Okay? So we look at this very, very beautiful dua of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? And I'm going to explain why I'm bringing in this dua. Okay? But by the way, this dua is called Du'a ul-Ghammi. Right? It is the dua that a person makes when they are feeling sorrow. Right? So that's the beautiful thing about our deen, is that when we are sad, right? When we are depressed, right? Our outlet, right? Our outlet is Allah. Right? Knowing who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, making dua to Allah, it is our outlet. It's okay. Right? Sometimes people think that, I'm not supposed to feel sad. That's a misconception. You wouldn't be human if you didn't feel sad. You're human. You're going to feel sad. Okay? There are going to be days where you feel depressed. Okay? There are days when the ummah is collectively going to be depressed. Okay? We are experiencing such days with what's happening around the world. Right? But at such a time, who do we turn to? Right? That's the question. Right? So now over here, you see in this beautiful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, what you see is a complete submission, right? Where the Prophet ﷺ completely submits and hands himself over to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's Allahumma inni abduk. Oh Allah, I am your slave. Right? Ibnu abdik, I am the son of your slave. Yani, my father is also your slave. Ibnu amatik, the son of your bondswoman, meaning my mother is also your slave. I am your slave, my father is your slave, my mother is your slave. We all belong to you. Right? ناصيتي بيدك. Right? My forelock is in your hands. What does that mean? It means you can do with me whatever you want. Right? I hand myself over to you. ماض في حكمك. Whatever you decree about me is going to happen. It's going to be executed. I have no say. And then amazingly after that, the Prophet ﷺ says, عَدْلٌ فِيَّ قَضَاءُكَ. And whatever you have decreed about me, that I'm going to lose a child. Is losing a child something easy? No, not something easy. Right? Extremely difficult. But عَدْلٌ فِيَّ قَضَاءُكَ. If that is what you have decreed, then wallahi al-azim, it is just. Okay? Because you are the most just. You've decreed it, I am content with your decree. عَدْلٌ فِيَّ قَضَاءُكَ. Okay? How does the Prophet ﷺ have this level of iman? Okay? Because his connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And then he starts with the dua. أَسْأَلُكَ اللَّهُمَّ بِكُلِّ اسْمٍ هُوَ لَكَ. O Allah, I ask you by every name that you have. سَمَّيْتَ بِهِ نَفْسَكَ. That you have named yourself with. أَوْ أَنزَلْتَهُ فِي كِتَابِكَ. Or you revealed it in your book. Most of the names that we know is from the Quran, right? Okay. أَوْ عَلَّمْتَهُ أَحَدًا مِّنْ خَلْقِكَ. This is the part we should be excited about. Okay. Or you have taught it to one of your creations. Right? What that means is every single person can have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? You could have a name that you connect to Allah. عَلَّمْتَهُ أَحَدًا مِّنْ خَلْقِكَ. You've taught it to any of your creation. And then subhanallah, أَوْ اسْتَأْثَرْتَ بِهِ فِي عِلْمِ الْغَيْبِ عِنْدَكَ. Or you have kept it hidden in your unseen knowledge. Meaning there are names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that no one knows. The Prophet ﷺ doesn't know this name. No angel knows this name. Can you imagine the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That He has these names that even the prophets don't know. فِي عِلْمِ الْغَيْبِ عِنْدَهُ. After such a powerful dua, by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through all of His names, the Prophet ﷺ says what? أَن تَجْعَلِ الْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمَ رَبِيعَ قَلْبِي. Okay? That I am sad for sure. But oh Allah, I know one outlet that will remove my sorrow, and that is that, oh Allah, make the Quran, make your speech if you translate Rabi', literally it means spring. What happens in the spring? Blossom, right? Is it a cheerful time or a depressing time? Cheerful time, right? That, oh Allah, make your Quran, make your speech what brings life to my heart. So that when I'm down, when I recite your book, all of a sudden I feel uplifted. Right? وَجَلَاءَ أَحْزَانِي. Okay? وَنُورَ صَدْرِي. Make it the light of my chest. وَجَلَاءَ حُزْنِي. And make it the removal of my sorrows. وَذَهَابَ هَمِّي وَغَمِّي. And make it the repulsion and expulsion of all of my worries and anxieties. Right? How many of us can say that we have that connection with the Quran? That when I recite the Quran, then all of my sorrows, they just disappear. They vanish. Right? So this is how the Prophet ﷺ, he is connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names. So the point for which I brought this dua is because you will see from here that there is no limit to the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Any name and attribute that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Himself with, we describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that attribute. We believe in it as is. Okay? At the same time, we realize that those attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are fundamentally different from what we are. Right? So we kind of covered that concept already. Right? We are seeing, we hear, we this, we that. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attribute is entirely different. Okay? So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Nuh alayhi salam, right? وَاصْنَعِ الْفُلْكَ بِأَعْيُنِنَا, right? Make the ship in front of our eyes, right? So we have an eye, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, our eyes. What do we say? The eye of Allah is a sifa. It is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is fundamentally different from the reality of our eyes. Okay? So many times people have this question. It's like, oh, but then, didn't we say that Allah doesn't resemble created beings? Correct. But then Allah says, بِأَعْيُنِنَا, right? بِيَدِهِ الْأَمْرِ, the matter is in His hand. So Allah's hand, Allah's eye, all of that is a sifa of Allah. It's an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It comes in the Quran, we believe in it, and we don't ask how. We believe that it has a reality that's different than ours. Yes?
Is that a naqli or a naqli, a conclusion that's been come to? So like, is it stated in the scripture that these attributes are different? Or is that a...
Yes. So we, for example, we did لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, that nothing is like Him. Right? So the Quran is never going to contradict itself. Right? It's the principle of non-contradiction. Okay? So the Quran tells us that Allah is not like anything. But then we also have that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, right, the eye, hand, other attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we may think that, hey, well, this is what humans do. Right? So what's our belief regarding that? Our belief regarding that is 100% we believe in it, it's in the Quran. Right? Allah describes Himself with that. It is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is fundamentally different from our attributes. Right? How do we understand it? We say Allah knows best. It is a meaning that befits Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Now we'll go through some of Allah's affirmative attributes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the name Al-Alim, okay, which means all-knowing. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His knowledge is past, present, and future. Okay? What is our knowledge restricted to? The past, right? And the present. Okay? We can know for sure for something that happened in the past. We know what's happening at the moment. Can we know what's going to happen in the future? We can make very accurate predictions. Right? Like the meteorologist is really good. Right? In Chicago, they're notoriously wrong because they say it won't snow and then it will snow. Right? Yes, you had a question?
It's okay.
Sure. So, anytime you want to ask, anyone can ask, inshallah. Okay? So now, this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows all tenses, عَالِمُ الْغَيْبِ وَالشَّهَادَةِ. Right? He knows the unseen and He also knows what is visible. Right? So has the future occurred yet for us? We can't see the future. Right? But no such restriction is there for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember when we talked about subhanallah? We said there's no limits or deficiencies in Allah's attributes. Right? So our knowledge is deficient. It is restricted to the past, it's restricted to the present. It does not extend to the future. Right? No human being has knowledge of the ghaib. Okay? When Jibreel alayhi salam, in the famous hadith of Jibreel, when he came to the Prophet alayhi salam, he asked him, Mata sa'a? Right? When is the hour? So the Prophet alayhi salam, he responded to him, Masailu anha a'lam min al-mas'ul. Or mal mas'ulu anha a'lam min as-sa'il. The one who's being asked does not know more than the one who is asking. And the Prophet Jibreel is the one who's questioning, and the Prophet ﷺ is the one being questioned. What's the Prophet ﷺ saying? I don't know any more than you do. Right? Meaning just like you don't know the unseen, I also don't know the unseen. So no human knows the unseen. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. Okay? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's going to happen in the future. Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the name Al-Qadir. Right? The powerful. Right? This is from His attribute of Qudra. And He's the power, capability, determination. We hear in the Quran over and over, وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٍ. Right? He is powerful over everything. Okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Alim, He knows, He is Al-Qadir, He has the power to do it. Okay? So if you want to remember, we talked about rational proofs, right? Allah's knowledge and His power are things that we can prove rationally. Because the world came into existence, He needed a cause to come into existence. Okay? Now, whoever is going to cause that world to come into existence is going to need ultimate knowledge to bring all of it into existence. Okay? So He's Al-Alim. I may have all the knowledge on how to build a rocket ship, but if I can't move my hands and legs, can I build a rocket ship? So I don't have the power to build a rocket ship. Okay? So the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did create the world, what do we know now? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has al-Qudrah. He has the power to do so. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the attribute of irada. Okay? Irada means will and volition. Meaning whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, it's by His choice. Okay? So let me put a phrase out there and you guys tell me if it sounds familiar, okay? A blind, unguided process. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Okay. Where does it sound familiar from?
I don't know, I'm just heard it.
Okay. It's often how they describe evolution. Right? The modern, right, or the current explanation of how creatures develop and they change is through a blind, unguided process. Okay? And it just happens by itself. There's no plan there, there's no choice. No one's choosing it. It's fundamentally against our Aqeedah. We cannot believe in that. Okay? Because number one, nothing just happens by chance. Okay? There's no such thing as random. Okay? And we cannot believe that it is unguided. Okay? Because everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, He does by His choice. Okay? It's very, like I said before, it's things that we say, but then we don't take out the time to think about it. Look, the fact that you're sitting here, that means Allah chose you to sit here. That's what we're saying. Right? It was the irada of Allah that you are sitting here. Right? It is the irada of Allah that you are continuing to listen. Right? Everything that happens is by the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He chose it to happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the attributes of hearing and seeing. Okay? From this we get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names. As-Sami' al-Basir. Okay? The As-Sami' is the one who hears, and Al-Basir is the one who sees everything. Okay? Remember how I said that our Aqeedah is in our dhikr, in our remembrance? Okay? Our salah is our pinnacle of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we get up from ruku', what do we say? Sami'a Allah. Listen to the word Sami'a. Right? What does it sound like? As-Sami'. Right? When we get up from ruku', we're saying Allah has heard the one who praises Him. Right? So when you build your conviction in the fact that Allah is As-Sami', that Allah hears, then what that will impact is that in your salah, when you get up from ruku' and you say Sami' Allahu liman hamida, now you're actually saying, yes, Allah is listening to what I'm saying. Right? It has an impact. Yes.
If you've already described what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not, doesn't that mean everything else is things that He is?
Part of it, right? But then there are things that we didn't negate, they're just affirmatory. Right? So for example, we didn't say that, okay, Allah doesn't, for example, there's no attribute that says that, we don't have a name that says Allah is not merciful. You know what I'm saying?
I see.
Okay? But we do affirm that Allah has mercy. Okay? Okay? Now, very important point. Okay? All of these attributes, they go back to perception. Right? When human beings, right, when we see something, when we hear something, that's how we get knowledge. Right? Now for us, our seeing and our hearing, it's different because we have the eyes for seeing and we have ears for hearing. Okay? But then we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have any physical attributes because He's different from created beings. Okay? Now what is our belief here? We say, no, we establish, we will not say that Allah's hearing and His seeing is the same as His knowledge. Okay? Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He has this attribute of ilm, we say, yes, He has the attribute of ilm. It is different from His seeing. It is different from His hearing, even if we don't understand the reality of these attributes. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, He sees, and He hears. It's three separate attributes. Okay? We don't combine them into one and just say, oh, this is just one attribute. Okay? Because however Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Himself, that is how we describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the attribute of speech. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks. Okay? In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. Okay? So if you look over here, you see this taklima. In Arabic, this comes for the purpose of emphasis. Right? The technical term for this is maf'ul mutlaq. Right? It's there to emphasize and to remove any possibility of interpretation. Okay? So when we say Allah speaks, we mean that Allah speaks. Okay? Allah speaks, He has the attribute of speech. Allah's speech is fundamentally different from ours. Okay? So now a person's like, well then how does He speak? This way we say, shh. We don't ask that question. Because we will never truly comprehend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what does it do for us? Okay? How many of us know that there's an Imam called Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah? We've heard this name, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah. Okay? So well, if we haven't, right, then Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah, he was a great scholar. Okay? And he was also called Imam Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay, remember that term we said, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Right? The people of Sunnah and Jama'ah. Right? The Sunni. Right? He was given the honorary title of Imam Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The leader of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Does anyone know why? No? Okay. At his time, there was a deviant group that said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not speak. They said that the Quran is not the speech of Allah. Okay? They said Allah created the Quran. It's not His attribute. It's not eternal. It's not His speech. Hundreds of scholars were tortured and eventually they gave in to the oppressive regime. And said, you know what, just to save ourselves for the moment, we'll say, okay, fine. From a legal perspective, was there elasticity for them to do so to protect their life? Sure. Okay? That's not the point of our discussion. When they came to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah, they had him whipped. They had him put in jail. Okay? Literally, the punishment that's described in the books is that they tied his hands, opposite hands, to horses. And then they beat the horses to run in opposite sides. Okay? But Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah, he refused. He was whipped until he lost consciousness, came back whipped again. But he refused to say that the Quran is not the speech of Allah. Okay? This is Imamuna Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah. Okay? There's a reason we call him Imam Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay? After this, right, Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he took the shirt of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah and he kissed it. And he put it on his forehead. Right? And Imam Shafi'i was the teacher of Imam Ahmad. So when the teacher kisses the shirt of the student, that tells you a little bit something about the student, yeah? Okay? This is some special student we have here. Okay? Is because of what he did for the ummah. What was it that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah he understood? Why did he stand such a staunch stance? Because it has to do with our connection to Allah. If you say that Allah doesn't speak, then Habibi, what are you doing in Salah? You understand what I'm saying? When you're in Salah, you are actually believing that I am conversing with my Rabb. Right? We know from Hadith that when we recite Surah Fatiha, for every ayah, what? There's a response from Allah. Right? So when I say that our Aqeedah is part of our dhikr, it's part of our Salah, then it's literally what I mean. If you say that Allah doesn't have the attribute of speech, then what is your Salah? Your Salah has no value now. Right? You've removed the spirit of Salah. This is what Imam Ahmad rahimahullah he understood. Right? He said, I may have the judicial elasticity to say, okay, like all the other scholars, I'll do the same. But what did he say? He said, if Imam Ahmad today says it, then the rest of the ummah will say that, oh, Imam Ahmad said it's okay. Then today you and I sitting here in Coatesville wouldn't be saying that Allah has the attribute of speech. So do we owe something to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal? We do. Right? So that's why we make dua for our pious scholars. Right? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him on behalf of the ummah. Right. So we considered it from the aspect and the perspective of negation and affirmation. Now there's another beautiful way of looking at the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? This is what we call Sifatul Jamali wal Jalal. Okay? So Sifatul Jamal, they are the attributes of beauty. Okay? They are those attributes that when you hear them, they inspire the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your heart. Okay? Who can give me a name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that when you hear it, it inspires love in your heart?
Al-Wadud.
Al-Wadud, mashallah. Right? Al-Ghafur, the loving, the forgiving. What else? Ar-Rahman, the merciful. Ar-Rahim, right? The one whose mercy is specific to the believers. Right? There's a difference between Rahman and Rahim. Right? And then you have Ash-Shakur, the appreciative. Right? And there's some from that side, inshallah. I'm going to try to listen. One more time, inshallah. Well, Jabbar is definitely Jalal, sister. That's definitely Jalal. Right? Al-Wahhab. Okay, Al-Wahhab, right? The one who gifts. Okay? So there are these attributes that when you hear them, they immediately spark in your heart like this. As believers, you don't even really need to be explained to you. Right? Because when you hear it, your heart just automatically feels that way.
Yes.
Okay? Right? So these are the Sifatul Jamal. Okay? And then there are those attributes of Jalal. Right? For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Dhul Jalali. He's the one of grand. Grandeur, I'm just, there are places where the English language unfortunately just falls short. Khalas. Okay? I cannot do anything. And there's nothing that I can do about that, right? Okay? Jalal is something that you speak the Arabic language, you understand. Ma ma'ana Jalal. It's واضح. مفهوم. It's clear. Right? Even in Urdu, you say Jalaliya. You understand what it means, right? In English, I've been looking for hey, what do we do for Jalal? Right? So it's okay, grandeur, right? But you can understand it from its effect. Okay? The effect of Jalal is not that you're scared of the person. It's not like you're they're gonna do something bad to you. It's a fear that comes out of immense respect that you have. Right? It's awe, right? So someone that you respect so much that when you're in their presence, I'm awestruck. Can't say anything. Right? So there are names of Allah that give us the feeling of that He is Al-Jaleel. right? Al-Jaleel, right? That's that awe factor. Right? So we have Abdul Jalal here, mashallah, right? So that's where it comes from. Okay? Right. So what are some names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that inspire His fear and His awe in our hearts? Al-Jabbar, right? We already got it. Right? Al-Jabbar, so, okay, one second. We can give the sisters a point, even why? Because look, I'll tell you. Al-Jabbar is a very unique name. It's a very unique name. Al-Jabbar has the meaning of subduing and subjugating. Right? أجبرته على الشيء. I force him to do something. Right? So it doesn't matter what we want. What Allah wants is going to happen. He's Al-Jabbar. Okay? But in the Arabic language, when bones break and you take a band-aid and you put it around the bones, right? That band-aid is called Al-Jabira. It is what mends the bones. Okay? Right? So that is now Jamal. Because, the ulama al-qulub, the scholars of the hearts, they say Al-Jabbar is truly a unique one. Because when the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes into your heart, then you're not able to, you're overwhelmed and your heart breaks. Right? And when your heart breaks, is the same Al-Jabbar that puts it together. Right? So that is Al-Jabbar. Right? So yes, definitely, we'll give the sisters and the brothers a point. Right? So Jabbar as well. Okay? What's another name that gives us the meaning of Jalal? Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, right? The king. What was that? Al-Wadud? Al-Wadud is Jamal, right? The loving. Right? Okay. So we have Al-Malik for sure, the king. You don't mess with the king. Right? When you're in front of the king, you just put your head down. Right? So that's the king. Okay? So what we notice is that these are attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that sometimes a believer is going to be on this side. And a believer is always in flux. And he's always balancing between these two. Okay? And this is what happens when you do the dhikr of Allah. Right? When you تَقْشَعِرُّ مِنْهُ جُلُودُ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ. Right? تَقْشَعِرُّ literally means, when you see the goosebumps on your skin, that's تَقْشَعِرُّ. إِقْشَعَرَّةِ الْجِلْدِ. Right? Just when your skin contracts. Okay? So the people who truly remember Allah, when they do dhikr, they actually do dhikr, there is a physical impact even on their skin. Right? When you hear the name of Allah, وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ, their hearts shake. Right? وَاقْشَعَرَّتْ جُلُودُ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ. You have the true knowledge of Allah. When you hear Al-Qahhar, it's like, whoa. Like goosebumps. Okay? And then, ثُمَّ تَلِينُ جُلُودُهُمْ وَقُلُوبُهُمْ إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Then at the same time, their hearts, and the Quran says, وَجُلُودُهُمْ, their skin also becomes soft for the dhikr of Allah. Because sometimes you hear the jalal of Allah, and then that's when you're just like, oh Allah save me, oh Allah protect me from your punishment, oh Allah I don't want to do anything to displease you. And then you hear Al-Ghafur, it's like, Alhamdulillah, you're forgiven. Right? As the Prophet ﷺ, he beautifully put, right? Allahumma la malja wa la manja minka illa ilayk. Allah, there's no place of running to, and there's no place of refuge from you illa ilayk, except to you. Right? So this is another aspect from how you can look at the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So I'll end with this inshallah. Look in our sujood, right, in our sajda. We say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. When you say Subhanallah, that's stating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's purity. Allah is far above. Right? So now the slave of Allah feels this distance. That who am I? Who is Allah? Right? How can I have a connection with the one who's so pure? Right? But then immediately what happens? Rabbi, Rabbi, Allah pulls you back. My Rabb, the one who nourishes me. the one who allows me to breathe, the one who feeds me, the one who gives me my family. Rabbi. So you see this balance, right? You feel that pull, right? It's sometimes this way, sometimes that way. So, you feel this emotion, this range of emotions in your salah when you understand these names and when you understand the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll end with that, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our hearts, those hearts that respond to the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may He fill our hearts with the nur of His names. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Takbir. Takbir. Takbir.